YouTube. So today we're going to do a video review of the prevalence of misconduct and fraud within the scientific community and academia. And so why would we do a video like this? Well, the reason we do a video like this is because on this channel, I actually review and have done a number of videos reviewing another channel named Professor Dave Explains, otherwise known on this channel as Dogmatic Dave. Dogmatic Dave is a very large channel. He has millions of subscribers, constantly puts out, videos on scientific topics and just basically backing up the mainstream narrative in every way, shape, or form. He is very dogmatic about what he believes, and he is obviously a propped up narrative pushing shill for the mainstream as it relates to YouTube. And so the reason we're going to do this is because in other videos that I've reviewed of his, I've gone over, things like the reproducibility crisis, given other examples of just how much fraud and nonsense there is within the scientific community and academia. But I've had a lot of his fans come on my channel and just say things like, I've demonstrated nothing, you've provided proof of nothing. His low IQ fans will equate me saying there is dogmatism, obviously dogmatism within the scientific community and academia. They'll equate that to me saying that the science itself and the scientific method itself is dogmatic, which those are two completely different things. So today, I'm just going to go through example after example after example to demonstrate just how frequent and how much fraud there is within the scientific community, scientific research institutions, NASA, colleges, universities, academia, all of that. And one of the reasons I'm going to do this is just to demonstrate how wrong Dave and his followers are as it relates to the level of fraud, dogmatism, and all that within these communities. Because Dave says stuff like this.
Is ridiculous. The scientific community should be trusted above all other sources.
I'm going to demonstrate how not only that is not true, I don't even see how this is even debating or argument at this point. I mean, a lot of this stuff just goes without saying. There is a ton of fraud, and it is very frequent within the scientific community. And so I'm going to try to keep this video under 20, 30 minutes. But we're going to go through university presidents, professors, researchers, research institutions. Just examples after examples from different articles and different time periods. I'm going to keep it to the last 20 years. Maybe we might go back to the late 90s. But I'm just going to show you again how much fraud and nonsense there are within these communities. And some of this stuff I've gone over before. However, the majority of this stuff is this is just other additional sources of fraud. A lot of this stuff is examples that I've never brought up in other videos. And I know that Professor Dave fans, they don't even watch my videos and they'll comment. And some of my Professor Dave videos, in the review of them, in the last 10 minutes, I'm just example after example after example after example of how much fraud and nonsense there is, specifically as it relates to what Dave is talking about. So, how much fraud and nonsense is there within the academic community? Well, here's the Lancet. So this is an article from, a journal that has been around for decades, and this is from 2004. So this is over 20 years old. And I think in recent times, maybe this article, correct me if I'm wrong, may have been redacted by the Lancet because, you can't say stuff like this. But this is just basically an admonition of how much nonsense has been going on then, 20 years ago, prior to that, and how much we're going to go into examples of how much is going on now. But this is from the Lancet from 2004. This article is titled Lies, Damn Lies in Scientific Research. You can read this if you want to. I'll put the link in the description below for this article, but I'm just going to read a couple excerpts from this. So Since then, U.S. investment in research has climbed steadily and in recent years steeply. In 1995, for example, the U.S. National Institute of Health, NIH, budget was $67 million. This year, under a decade later, the NIH budget is nearly $28 billion. To protect this investment, Judson charges, scientists play down the extent and seriousness of fraud. In sum, he says, the scientific communities believe that public funding is their right, but so is freedom from public control. The grandness and guardians must defend the honor of science. Fraud, if it proved to be more than rare and individual, perhaps even to be built into the ways institutions of science work, would engender distrust among legislators and the public and so threaten the money stream and self governance. Fraud has always been present in science long before the NIH was handing out grants. George Mendel, the founder of genetics, had results that are just too good to be true. Louis Pasteur's notebooks, long kept secret, reveal that he misled the world and his fellow scientists about the research behind two of his most famous experiments: the vaccination of sheep against anthrax and that of a boy against rabies. And it is common knowledge that Sigmund Freud fabricated many of the case studies on which he built his psychoanalytic theories and career. I mean, this is nothing new. Fraud in science has been around for a while. In other videos, I've actually quoted Nobel Prize winners, former professors of medicine at Harvard saying how, many of the research papers within the medical industry shouldn't be trusted, as many as half of them. But here's another corroborating article. This is from Nature from May 2016, and it's titled 1,500 Scientists Lift the Lid on Reproducibility. So I've actually covered this article before. This is an article basically demonstrating that the majority of scientific experiments and things like that in peer-reviewed research papers and things like that can't be reproduced. So I'm just going to read the first couple of paragraphs. Survey sheds lights on the crisis rocking research. More than 70% of researchers have tried and failed to reproduce another scientist's experiments, and more than half have failed to reproduce their own experiments. Those are some of the telling figures that emerged from Nature's survey of 1,576 researchers who took a brief online questionnaire on reproducibility in research. The data reveals sometimes contradictory attitudes towards reproducibility, although 52% of those surveyed agree that there is a significant crisis of reproducibility. Less than 31% think that failure to reproduce published results means that the result is probably wrong, and most say that they still trust the published literature. Yeah, I'm sure they do. There's no conflict of interest there. So just for all those dogmatic day fans or any normie who believes all the mainstream crap that comes out of, academic institutions and the scientific bodies and, anything that comes out from the news and Bill Nye the Science Guy, just to say that something like this is completely illegitimate. Well, here's the University of Southern California School of Engineering acknowledging that this is a problem. This is the USC School of Engineering. This is an article from 2022. So this is 6 years after Nature published their article. I mean, in this time period, they couldn't find a way to disprove what Nature was claiming. Not only did they not do that, they're acknowledging that there's a reproducibility crisis in science. So the title, The Reproducibility Crisis in Science, these researchers have a fix. You can go down here and read. The big problem in science right now, in the last 2 decades, the science community has come to understand that many scientific studies are hard or almost impossible to accurately reproduce. It's been termed the reproducibility crisis. In a 2016 survey for 1,500 scientists done by the publication Nature, 70% of researchers reported that they have tried and failed to reproduce another scientist's experiments, and more than half failed to reproduce their own experiments. So this is literally a reputable university acknowledging that there's a problem and then trying to research to fix it. So for anybody that says this isn't real or, this is not something that the scientific community admits or anything like that, completely false. There's other articles from Cambridge that admit the same problem and what can be done about it. And so now we're going to go into examples after examples, university presidents, professors, researchers. We're even going to get into NASA, because I know how some of you love NASA fanboys, on fraud and how much fraud Some of it is in terms of research and papers having to be redacted. Some of it is just immoral people like laundering money and stealing money from the government or a university or something like that, just to show you how immoral a lot of these people are. So, I believe there's a correlation with atheism and the overwhelming majority of professors and universities are liberal, left wing atheists, and it doesn't surprise me because atheists have no objective standard for morality. Many atheists will admit there is no objective morality, meaning that morality is kind of your personal preference. But then they'll try to debate Christians on slavery in the Bible, and just who cares? From your perspective, why is slavery wrong? It's just these weird arguments that they get into. But I would argue the scientific community is dependent on something like Christianity to provide a moral foundation for the individuals within that community to have internal standards within themselves to not lie and cheat and steal and all that kind of stuff. But the moral decay of the society, of course you're going to have, if you have people who don't believe in objective morality, why would they care if they lie? I mean, unless they get caught, that's when they care. But here's just a ton of examples to demonstrate how frequent this is. And again, this is going to go over the last like 20 years. You can go back further. There's going to be recent articles, some from 10 years ago. So we're going to skip around a little bit. But here's just an article from The Economist to help. I guess this is the last article I pulled up to help just reinforce the last three articles that we've been talking about. So this is The Economist. This is from March 1st, 2023. How to tackle scientific fraud. Our podcast on science and technology. This week we investigate the worrying amount of fraud in medical research and ask what can be done about it. There is a worrying amount of fraud in medical research. As many as 1 in 50 research papers may be unreliable because of fabrication, plagiarism, or serious errors. Fabricated data can influence the guidelines which doctors use to treat patients. So this is just an entire article. I'm not going to read it. You can get a subscription to The Economist. Again, reinforcing the last three articles that we read. So here's the first example. This is from Science. So this is not from some conspiracy website. This is science.org. This is from 2009. Fake data at the ETH. A data fabrication scandal has erupted at a place that doesn't see many of those. The ETH in Zurich. Peter Chan, a physical organic chemist there, has been dealing with problems with some earlier publications from 2000. So this is 20 years ago, on the spectra and ionization energies of carbon radicals. Here's one of the papers, which has now had to have been redacted. This supports, research papers that can't be reproduced. These data couldn't be reproduced. As became clear in the years after these papers came out, an investigation by the ETH showed what appears to be clear evidence of fakery. Things like the background noise being exactly the same and what are supposed to be several different experimental spectra of different species. In fact, all the parties involved with the suspect papers agree that the data has been fabricated, but none of them admit to have done it. Of course. Here's an article from the University of Houston. This is from May 2019, and this is going over 4 big fraudulent cases at different universities in the last 10 to 15 years. So Duke University cancer research fraud. In 2010, Dr. Anil Patti left Duke University after allegations of research fraud surfaced. The fraud came in waves. First, Dr. Patti flagrantly lied about being a Rhodes Scholar to attain hundreds of thousands of dollars in grant money from the American Cancer Society. Then the doctor was caught outright falsifying data in his research after he discovered one of his theories for personalized cancer treatment was disproven. This theory was intended to justify clinical trials for over 100 patients. Because it was disproven, the trial could no longer take place. Dr. Patti falsified data in order to continue with these trials and attain further funding. So there's Duke. Here's plagiarism in Kansas. Mahesh Visvanathan and Gerald Lushington, 2 computer scientists from the University of Kansas, confessed to accusations of plagiarism. They copied large chunks of their research from the works of other scientists in their field. The plagiarism was so ubiquitous that even the summary statement of their presentation was lifted from another scientist's article in a renowned journal. Oh, so that was a program at the University of Kansas. Here's Columbia University, research misconduct. The year was 2010. Bingju Seizhen was finally caught falsifying data after 10 years of continuously committing fraud. See, here's another point that people bring up, especially I've seen Dogmatic Day fans and normies and people who just follow the mainstream. Well, the whole point of having, research and having people check other people's work is see clearly the process is working because the fraud is being found. The problem with that is a lot of this stuff goes on for decades and it's presented as fact. And these people are professors at universities who should be fired and many times in jail, but they still continue their work because nobody finds it. Or even if they find it, they're exonerated to save face and make the university look good or whatever community look good, so they settle out of court or something like that. And no, nobody, there's not, I mean, this stuff goes on for decades in many of these cases. So the idea that there's just, anything that's been quote unquote peer reviewed and published in a peer reviewed journal, you should just take it. You should just take it as fact. No, not at all. It almost means nothing at this point. It's irrelevant if something's peer reviewed because this stuff goes on for decades. That's the whole point. And a lot of times, this stuff isn't found by other researchers. It's the FBI getting involved because of funny business going on with money. And after the FBI gets involved, then people start getting nervous. They start talking and you find fraudulent research. So no, I mean, a lot of times it has nothing to do with the process fixing itself. Here's Penn State fraud in 2012. Craig Grims ripped off the U.S. government to the tune of $3 million. He pled guilty to wire fraud, money laundering, and engaging in fraudulent statements to obtain grant money. A lot of these examples involve grant money. Grims bamboozled the National Institute of Health and the National Science Foundation into granting him $1.2 million for research on gases in blood, which help detect disorders in infants. Sadly, it was revealed by the attorney's office that Grims never carried out this research and instead used the majority of his granted funds for personal expenditures. Next, here is information on Eric T. Pullman. So, this is from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services on Eric T. Pullman, findings of scientific misconduct. Summary. Notice is hereby given that the Office of Research Integrity and the Acting Assistant Secretary for Health have taken final action in the following case. Eric T. Pullman, PhD, University of Vermont. Based on the report of an investigation conducted by the University of Vermont, admissions made by the respondent, and additional analysis conducted by ORI and its oversight review, the U.S. Public Health Service, PHS, found that Eric T. Pullman, PhD, former professor, Department of Medicine at the University of Vermont, College of Medicine, engaged in scientific misconduct and research. The research was supported by the National Institute of Health. This institution gets ripped off a ton. Grants from the National Institute of Aging, the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive and Kidney Diseases, and the National Center for Research Resources. Yeah, so here's another esteemed PhD guy just conducting, fraud in his research and more than likely money laundering or something like that. But I mean, and this goes back to like the late 90s, So, maybe we'll read this last part. Proposing research that respondent falsified preliminary data purportedly obtained in a longitudinal study of aging and NIH grant application submitted May 27, 1999. Yeah, so I mean, this is an example that goes back 25 years at this point. So here's the Salt Lake Tribune. University of Utah researcher faked data for years, according to investigators. Gene Stefano Bergidi was highly regarded among neuroscientists for his work on how life experiences change the brain, but a federal office found he manipulated his data. So this article is recent, so we're getting in We're getting into current news. April 26, 2024. A former University of Utah neuroscientist who was regarded in the field as a visionary manipulated results and fake data in his research for years, according to findings of a federal investigation. Here's another example. This stuff goes on for years. If the process is so good, why isn't it finding it pretty quickly? Yeah, you have a problem. We've already gone over this example. Here's another example that corroborates the first couple of articles that we read about reproducibility in crisis and how a lot of researchers can be involved in a lot of these various fraud cases. So this is a completely different university. This is an article from 2013, the Columbus Dispatch. This is the University of Ohio State. So probe by OSU misses fraud. Federal officials found evidence that more than 100 researchers nationwide committed misconduct over the past decade. Yeah, normies, you have a problem, Professor Dave fans. Hundreds over a decade. That's a massive problem. Why did this last so long? Why were there so many people involved? And experts are certain that universities and other institutions underreport that fraud, which comes at an untold cost to taxpayers. I've actually gone over this example in a video review of Dogmatic Dave, and his fans completely ignore this kind of stuff. So Ohio State University came close to becoming an example of underreporting. The university's investigation of research misconduct by a pharmacy professor failed at first to recognize his deception, according to documents obtained by the Dispatch. Terry Elton, a professor in OSU's College of Pharmacy, has retracted 6 published research papers, the Columbus Dispatch. Now, this is just one dude who had to retract 6 published research papers. And this fraud involved tons of people over a decade. I mean, good Lord. Here's an article from, when is this article from? 2023. So a more recent situation. Florida State University professor abruptly left his $190,000 a year role after being accused of faking data to make racism seem more common than it is, and having 6 of his research papers retracted. A criminology professor at Florida State University suddenly left his 6-figure-a-year position after being accused of fudging data to make racism seem more common. Eric Stewart has had 6 of his studies, one of which dates as far back as 2006. So this went on for 17 years. Oh, but it's fixing itself. Or it's just until federal investigators get involved, that's when stuff gets found out. Retracted amid allegations that he fabricated data by altering sample sizes. I mean, good Lord. Okay, so here we're going to get into examples of university presidents. So here's an article about Harvard University's presidents, and this isn't Claudine Gay. This is going back to the early 2000s, February 2006. So Summers resigns. Shortest term since Civil War. Boak will be interim chief. So this is the Harvard Crimson. University President Larch H. Summers announced yesterday that he'd step down from his post at the end of June, bringing to an end the shortest tenure of a Harvard chief since the Civil War. So this guy was involved in a bit of a scandal because one of his close buddies was an economics professor who, let's see here, the economics professor's last name was Scheffler. The Jones professor of economics was found liable by a federal court in 2004 for conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government while leading a Harvard economic reform program in Russia as it transitioned to capitalism in the 1990s. Scheffler settled the case for $2 million. So one of his friends got investigated for, trying to defraud the United States government. So this Harvard professor, part of the reason he had to step down was this whole scandal story. So that involved an economics professor. Let's see. I need to, here we go. No, I wanted to get into more. We can get into after this. Let's see. Resigns amid charges, sins against science. Okay. Here's another college president. So, former college president admits embezzlement. The former president of Morris Brown College pleaded guilty on Monday to embezzling millions of dollars in federal funds that were supposed to cover student tuition. So, this is an article from 2006. This is nothing new. You know, university presidents having to step down. Absolutely nothing new. Here's an article from last year, July 2023. This is one that I've gone over before. Stanford presidents resign after fallout from falsified data in his research. This is from NPR. The president of Stanford University has resigned after an investigation opened by the Board of Trustees found several academic reports he authored contained manipulated data. So I believe in this instance, it was actually found he wasn't allegedly related to the research misconduct, but it's kind of vague and whatnot. But papers he wrote years ago had to be redacted due to his research having fraudulent information. And this was just last year. Let's see. So here's the University of Louisville. This is from the Courier Journal. This is an article from 2016. So U of L scandals under James Ramsey, a timeline. So this was a president of Louisville. The University of Louisville has been buffeted by a string of scandals, allegations of financial mismanagement, embezzlement, and various controversies during the 14-year tenure of James Ramsey as president. Here's a timeline of events. I mean, literally the first thing on this timeline is from October 2008. Former U of L education dean Robert Fellner is indicted on federal charges of financial fraud involving about $2.3 million in grant money. He later pleads guilty and is sentenced to 63 months in prison. Ramsey has been a staunch supporter of Fellner and initially dismissed faculty and staff complaints as anonymous crap. I mean, this is a timeline of the amount of fraud. I mean, it even gets into athletics department fraud, which I know doesn't really concern what we're looking at. But I mean, this is just another university president that has all types of immoral nonsense associated with him. And here's an example that I've already gone over, just like the president of Stanford. Harvard's president, Claudine Gay, announced her resignation on Tuesday after her presidency had become engulfed in crisis over accusations of plagiarism and what some called her insufficient response to anti-Semitism on campus after the Hamas-led attacks on Israel on October. So this was an article from January 2024. Continuing, now we're going to move into, we're going to move out of university presidents. But here's an NBC News article from 2024. So this is, again, a recent example. Scientists behind Alzheimer's drugs in late-stage trials is indicted on charges of research fraud. The charges are related to alleged fabrication of research images and data that Hao Yun Wang may have used to secure federal grants from the National Institute of Health. There's that organization that gets scammed all the time. So here's an article from Cambridge University Press. This is from March 2022. Scientific Fraud Part 2, From Past to Present, Facts and Analysis. Scientific fraud has increased dramatically in recent years. This is literally Cambridge University writing an article about this. This is not a conspiracy website. Scientific fraud has increased dramatically in recent years. The main reason has been the exponential increase in the number of researchers that has greatly exceeded the increase in available resources. This has generated a situation of extreme competition that has dramatically increased in the tendency to commit FFPX. I mean, this is literally Cambridge admitting that the fraud has increased dramatically. And we're going to get into the last couple examples are NASA. So you can go to NASA's website and look up press releases that, like, Texas professor in 2020, Texas professor and researcher arrested on charges related to China's talents programs. Here's an example. Former NASA chief of staff pleads guilty to conspiracy involving $600,000 NASA contract with Mississippi State University. Here's a case. Yale University to pay $7.6 million to resolve false claims act and common law allegations where multiple researchers associated with Yale and NASA paid themselves even though they shouldn't have. So, I mean, there are tons of examples of the massive amounts of fraud within science. So hope this was helpful. I hope this was interesting. I hope this was not too long and boring, but just to demonstrate the number of institutions and people involved and how frequent it is. This is, I mean, we could keep going for hours and hours with this stuff. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this was interesting, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.